So, hey everyone. Oh, beverage time together.
Uh-huh.
Um,
It's
we're
water time. No
officially
coffee.
hit the live. We'll officially hit the intro and stuff in a bit. But in the meantime, hello everyone. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. That's for sure. Good shirt, by the way. Crypto Coast. What does it say?
It's just got some logos: Bitcoin, Ethereum,
Oh,
whatnot.
is it an
Cute.
Edge specific shirt or no? I see
It's
the Edge
Edge and
logo.
another company here in San Diego that was in crypto.
Hmm.
Did a picnic at one point in time. Was summer of 18 maybe, And so this is just the picnic shirt, Crypto Coast.
Yeah, I got my
Oh
Zcash
yeah,
one
today's I
from
think
Zcon.
ZCon V is going on right now.
Yes, and I'm going to a physical Zcash meetup as well, which you don't want to dox
Oh,
myself too much, but just don't car bomb me on the way out. But yeah, so all that kind of stuff. It's very fun. Generally speaking, what's the sentiment been like in your corner of the world, whether it's in your office or just the crypto people local to you, as far as all this doomy gloomy stuff we're going to be talking about?
no, we haven't had any events since a lot of the doom and gloom. So we do host events in our office. Ironically, we have a meetup coming up next week about
Hmm.
regulation and will regulation hurt or benefit cryptocurrency? I think right now people are feeling definitely one side of that statement. um, but that's one of the topics of conversation. We'll have a chain and I think an analytics company that are coming out to talk on a panel about this. But the community hasn't been as what do you call it, interactive as of not that they're not interactive, is that we haven't had any events to actually bring them together. So there hasn't been much
Hmm.
chatter in the community that I'm aware of, but at least within the office and people chatting about it,
Hmm.
I'd say like 10-20% of people have brought up some concerns like, hey, what's going on? What are all these different announcements happening? How does it concern us? Where do we overlap in the landscape of edge? How does it overlap in the landscape of individual like people in the company? And it's something that we definitely should be researching, looking at, it's valid to have a concern.
Hmm.
The question is now, how do you allow it to affect business operations? Do you obviously do like some companies and shut down if you deem that it's a heavy risk? Do you change what you're doing as a company and a product? Um, or do you feel like, you sail the course, right? Sail the course as you had intended, and that it's not something to concern about right now. Those are all the questions we have to ask and come to some conclusion on, and maybe kind of the topic of today. I don't want this to be about like edge and what we specifically are
Yeah.
deeming the path forward for our company. Although I do have maybe relevant opinions with respect to a lot of the news that has come out about different wallets, self custody, privacy, because all of those things are the you know talk topics of our mission at Edge. We just
Mm.
happen to go about it in some different ways than I think a lot of the companies on the board of doom and gloom, right?
Yeah, of
And
course.
so, yeah, yeah. So, no, definitely hot topic. It's been talked about. We've definitely spent quite a bit of a minute talking about it internally, and yeah, happy to share.
Absolutely. Well, let's hit the intro then and fully jump into the subject. All right. Ready? Three,
Okay.
two, one, go. So, hey everyone, officially happy Friday and welcome to the Digital Cash Rundown, episode 159. Although that's a little misleading these days because between travel and stuff, I've taken some weeks off here and there or substituted the time slot with this big Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash debate between Lorenzo and Jeremy, which is quite interesting. It's it sounds like the most nonsense, fruitless debate in the world to 2024 years, but it's actually been very enlightening. And there's a third installment coming in a few weeks, I guess. But anyway, um, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and all that. Just so you know, I schedule this out on, and so I share around the YouTube and the Odyssey links. But then when it goes live on my account, the Desert Links on X, as soon as it goes live, and it doesn't, I haven't found a way to pre-create a tweet or whatever to then share around. It just surprises you when you go live. So yeah, if you want to follow there, you do it there. Yeah, and I'm joined by the one and only pollinator of the crypto coast of the People's Republic of Edge, or
Maybe one day we can just replace the People's Republic of California and make it People's Republic of Edge.
Yeah. I do like how the Edge logo looks like it's like a separation thing, which is probably what California should do from the rest of the continent. So, I don't want to talk too much smack.
it still would be the 5th largest GDP in the world, but we'll see for how long.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's just jump into the stuff. So first, obviously, I have to talk about Coin ATM Radar. Because they've
been around for a while. I remember them from 2013, 2014. Great job, Coin ATM Radar, for sponsoring. Here I am. I'm going to promote Coin ATM Radar for you.
Go for it.
Because they're not paying me. Where do you find ATMs to buy and sometimes sell? Bitcoin in the day when I knew them, but maybe they're supporting some other assets. But great little map helps you find ways to get access to crypto. I'll let you continue. Go for it. But I've known about it for quite some years, over 10 years now, I think.
For sure. I don't know if for me, I've known if it's 10 years, but it's like 2014 or so, 2015 maybe. And they do have good support for other cryptos, and I have used them when traveling. Although that's getting harder and harder in like Europe and stuff because of some shutdowns. But anyway, let's hit this thing. So this podcast is, of course, sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When you're buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and safer than meeting some random person in a random place. Pour one out to local Monero real quick. And unlike an exchange, which could freeze your account, you truly own all the crypto you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you can find crypto ATMs and other services where you can buy or sell cryptocurrencies for cash. On their website, search by coin, address. If the ATM supports selling as well as buying, obviously I like the selling part because I don't really have cash to buy crypto with. And you can also search by geo area, such as country, state, or city. You can also check and compare actual rates and current fees, which is pretty useful. So find out more, coinatmradar.com, coinatmradar.com. All right, jump into this first thing here. The local Monero thing, as I alluded to in the read. So local Monero posted a tweet saying, hey everyone, after almost 7 years of operation, we have made the difficult decision to close our platform. The winding down process begins today and finishes 6 months from now. Our support will be available throughout this period. So, local Monero, which is I have never used them myself, but I assume it's just like a Monero and possibly Bitcoin version of like local Bitcoins, the OG version.
Yeah. I've never used them myself either.
Yeah. So, what do you think about this? Why do you think they're doing this?
It's not terribly unexpected, I'll be honest. Local Bitcoins have shut down for probably very similar reasons. Now, people might think, oh, it's Monero, it's private. Government's trying to shut down privacy coins. Well, they were already after Bitcoin, mainly because local Bitcoins and now local Monero both fit into their same bucket of effectively being an exchange, right? They are an exchange, but to the best of my knowledge, neither one of them did what you would call sufficient enough KYC, source of funds, the kind of things that a centralized exchange would normally be required to do. In not just the US, but in many jurisdictions. So given that, it is, even if you call it peer-to-peer, still you are, in many ways, you're the order book, right? You as in local Bitcoins, local Monero are the order book. You're the one that connects the buyer and the seller. And in some cases, actually also facilitates the transaction. That's actually a key word, facilitates the transaction. At least in local Bitcoins, many of the transactions went through local Bitcoins. I mean, you would send Bitcoin to local Bitcoins, and then you would unlock the funds once you've received cash or some other payment method. In the case of a fully digital online trade, you definitely had to go through local Bitcoins, where someone would maybe give you a gift card or send you a bank transfer, and then you would tell local Bitcoins to unlock the funds. So they were actually taking custody, and by taking custody, the funds are traveling through them. I'm going to presume similar things are happening in local Monero, but caveat emptor, I have not used local Monero, but I don't see why it would be much different given that they have things like an online trade versus, a local in-person trade. So given those factors, it doesn't surprise me. So this one, to me, it doesn't fit into the bucket of everything else, and shock, surprise, oh my God, self-custody. So it's just, okay. I figured that was going to happen at some point in time. unless they
Yeah.
drastically changed and became a very heavy KYC, kind of like an OTC desk. And really, that's kind of what this service is. It's an OTC desk, but without the level of KYC that would normally be required. Don't get me wrong. I'm against KYC. I think KYC is the illicit activity. I just know what the general rule set is to do those things. And so I would say they're kind of not quite fitting the bill in that sense.
Yeah, and not to blow smoke up your ass, but this is one of the reasons why I have you on to talk about this stuff is because even though I know you're fully aligned on the principles, you also have reasonable takes and, thought out takes and say them, whereas I do know some other people who are very pro crypto might be a little scared to they're like, well, we can't make it seem like it's not a big deal, otherwise we're feeding into our enemies or something. But I don't
I mean,
subscribe to that.
it's a big deal, but at the same time, it's kind of par for the course with what's happened historically. So I'm just saying,
Yes.
just looking at historical precedent and what's happened is, yeah, it's par for the course. I would have loved local Bitcoins to succeed and keep going, indefinitely. It still exists today. But I've talked to lawyers that, actually took that case. One of my friends is a lawyer that was very close to the local Bitcoins team and was trying to help them carve out a different architecture, technical architecture that wouldn't require them to succumb to a lot of the regulation. And they just said, it's just too much effort. Let's just shut this thing down. And so, yeah, local Monero, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and obviously local Bitcoins was first. Paxful wasn't exactly the same thing, but had some
Same.
similarities. Then you had local cryptos, which is great for a while. They just disappeared. People don't seem to really remember them disappearing, but they went away.
Yeah. They
And
weren't that
then
big.
local Monero, and then the next question, I guess, on that subject is bisc, because bisc, from what I've used it many years ago, but it does seem to be a decentralized architecture behind almost the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Now, where it's not just, oh, this is just a DEX you click and you swap, it did have like escrow things where you could, you had an arbiter who would hold it in escrow and then release it once, everything was okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
online purchases, all this kind of stuff. So where do you think bisc fits into all of this?
So really, it kind of depends on who's the arbiter and how many different kinds of arbiters, who determines the arbiter. I remember in the original days, if people remembered Open Bazaar, originally dark market, the concept was that two people could trade an item. This was trying to be a competitor to Amazon, but for potentially goods that you simply couldn't get on Amazon. Um, but the buyer and seller could determine the arbiter. And that arbiter could be potentially anybody that had an anonymous rating within the ecosystem. That's much, much harder to shut down because who are you actually shutting down in that sense? Who's actually controlling the money? Who's facilitating the transaction? And back in those days, I know that the architecture of Open Bazaar made it very difficult to target Open Bazaar themselves. They ran, I think at the time, almost no infrastructure. You had to download the software, install it on your computer, run it 24/7 if you're running a store in order to sell your goods. So ironically, Open Bazaar at the very end of their livelihood pivoted a little bit. And the goods that they were offering for sale ended up being crypto. So instead of buying some shoes or an inhaler, or some weed or whatnot, it's like, oh, you use Bitcoin to buy ETH, but using the exact same mechanism where there's an arbiter and there's a buyer and there's a seller. So going back to bisc in many ways is a similar architecture. The question, and what I don't know, and this is where, because I have not used bisc myself either, is
I did
who
it
is
one
the
time to
arbiter,
test it
right?
out.
Yeah, and so was it bisc that was the arbiter the one time you tested out? Did you get to choose an arbiter? I would say if it was bisc and they are the arbiter of default, then they start treading on murky waters, gray area, and this is a subject that I think relates to a lot of these other projects that are coming under scrutiny or shutting down or leaving the US, is because they're a partial controller or a partial facilitator of the transaction, right? And if as an arbiter you have the power to co-sign to move funds, you can be deemed as a facilitator, which now affects every multi-sig wallet where the wallet provider has a key. And this is a huge swath of the ecosystem, something that we've avoided from day one. Like, we do not want to hold any of the keys of our users at edge. There's a privacy concern in doing that, because once you have even one key, you know all the transactions, even if you don't sign them. And then there's also this a bit of a security risk as well, but then there's this regulatory risk in a sense that could you be deemed a facilitator? Multi-sig has never existed in the financial world, right? This is a very new concept. Usually multi-signature to transfer funds is a legal restriction, meaning usually whoever the entities are that can sign, there's still an entity that actually fully controls the funds. And it's just a legal binding contract. Hey, will we send it? Well, if this signature occurs when in crypto, this is the first time where it's not a legal contract. It's a actual, code hardened protocol that you cannot falsify. So we don't have good precedent for, are you facilitating a transaction as a multi-sig key holder? But I would say it's a very gray area. And I think one that is a sign of why many of the platforms that we're seeing shut down are seeing and hitting, and the concern that they have is because they're hitting this gray area.
Yeah, for sure. It will be interesting to see also because I would say probably bisc in some way would be considered by the authorities to be kind of in the same category. Again, we went over a ton of nuance right there about depending on how they do things. I guess then the question is it really decentralized enough to then, even if it's considered not, to be kind of targeted, sort of like, for example, Tornado Cash, where Tornado Cash as an immutable contract that's just out there, they could shut down the front ends and arrest the people and sanction addresses and all this kind of stuff, but it's just still out there. People are still using it. I don't know who, I don't know who would today, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, and that architecture is notably different. Less of actually holding any keys, like the operators, like, to the best of my knowledge, when I read through a lot of the briefs, didn't, at least extended for an extended period of time, hold any admin keys. Maybe initially, I think I might have recalled that they may have initially held some admin keys, but I think by the time that they were indicted, those were no longer in play. I mean, they weren't functional anymore. So I could be wrong about that. Definitely take that all with a grain of salt, but it is a notably different architecture. And I think where you're stepping on the line with things like Tornado Cash is, even if there isn't this custodial facilitating of the transaction, where the line gets drawn and the government can make a strong argument that solicits what I would call the emotional response of the public and potentially the emotional response of the judges that are going to hear this case and the jury that are going to hear this case, is that the product would be widely used by illicit actors, whatever you want to call illicit actors. What's illicit in one country is not illicit in another, but they can make an emotional case that you are facilitating and helping fund, not even facilitating the transaction, but you're helping fund kind of the bad actions in our world, like terrorist financing, child pornography, all of the bad terms. All of those things could much more easily be associated to a protocol that is very, 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 very specifically used to hide funds. Right?
Yeah,
and
that's where the
and
whole
one that is an
privacy is
extra
normal
jump
thing comes from.
Exactly, especially when you're trying to hide funds from a protocol that isn't normally as hidden. So in Ethereum, things are blatantly transparent on Ethereum. People dox themselves all the time. Brutally transparent. People dox themselves by creating their first name, last name, .eth domains, associating all their transactions with them, putting those domains on their Twitter profile, acquiring NFTs and bragging about them, and then those same NFTs are in addresses that they then go and use DeFi protocols to swap to token. Horribly doxed the Ethereum ecosystem. And then you go and put a privacy layer on top of that that's used by, I'm going to guess, sub 1% of the users of Ethereum. And so it's so much more effort to use it as well, that you probably get used by, admittedly, a lot of illicit actors, because their privacy is not normal, right? Privacy is the few that care so much about it to use it, and the few that need to use it because they're doing something bad, right? Or at least bad in whatever jurisdiction they're in, right? And so I see that as another, like, okay, you've set a major red flag in the product that you're creating, even if you're not in the same bucket of, okay, I'm facilitating the transaction via multi-sig, blah, blah, blah. It's just another major red flag. And that's another bucket of projects, companies that are either shutting down, have been shut down, or are leaving kind of unfriendly jurisdictions such as the US.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the Samurai, Wasabi, and whatnot.
Yeah, of course. What's his name? Rare Passenger. Hi, Rare. Mentioned in the super chat thingy here. He says he's watching live on Twitter. He says, "Question: What's the deal with bisc on liquid rails?" Now, this is something I'm not super familiar with. I know I did some basic searching, and I know that the Liquid network, was promoting that they could be traded, that Liquid could be, LBTC could be traded on bisc, as well as some other things. I wonder if you wouldn't mind, Rare, just clarifying more of that. But in the meantime, I don't think you probably don't have a point on that, right?
No, I mean, the fact that it's usable on bisc, sure, bisc hasn't been shut down. I don't know if they've gotten any notices on exactly what they're doing and whether or not them being a counterparty is an issue. Like you said, they do somewhat fit the model of local Bitcoins, but without taking custody. So that alone might make them a harder target. And really, it's about how hard of a target are you in the project you're building, because the easier the target it is, the cheaper it is for the government to go after you. The less they have to hire lawyers to seek and craft these storylines of why you should be taken down. And that's really the case. So if bisc is not trading privacy coins, right? It's Bitcoin. To my understanding, it's Bitcoin only.
Well, actually,
and B, they're not taking custody.
It's one of the biggest Monero dexes out there right now.
Is it really? Okay, so I stand corrected.
When I used it Bitcoin in 2018, 17, somewhere around there, I know they had Bitcoin as like a base pair, like a fiat pair, and then everything else. They had a bunch of other coins that were all crypto to crypto kind of thing. So maybe Monero's like that. Maybe it's not. Maybe you could do cash for it. But either way, Monero is definitely on.
It's definitely on there. Okay, so they've got a little bit of that red flag, but I mean, heck, Monero is supported by centralized exchanges, and so the part that might keep them as a bit less of a red flag, bit less of a target, is that yes, they don't take the custody, but are an arbiter, and as an arbiter, by default, you don't sign transactions as an arbiter. You don't need to sign transactions as an arbiter. You only have to sign them if there's a disagreement. Once again, it's super nuanced, but it's all gray area. And how big of a target are you? How easy is it to craft a story against that product and service is really what it comes down to. And the government's going to go after the bigger targets first, i.e., they came after centralized exchanges first. Right? They didn't go after the biscs and the wasabis and the samurais. They were much harder to create a storyline around. Centralized services, they look, they smell, they act like banks. Well, we have laws for banks. Let's apply those laws to these centralized services and see which ones are breaking the rules.
Yeah.
And they apply them. A bunch of them shut down. A bunch of them had to pay a bunch of fines. A bunch of them had to then change their business model, start KYCing users. It's the easy target. Stuff. Yeah. The next easiest target are ones that do mixing and tumbling and run infrastructure to make a transparent coin private, which once again is used by a very small percentage of people. That's a big target, right? And if you look at Wasabi, I believe, was it Wasabi or another one that not only was a front end wallet, but was also the back end for the mixing.
I think that was Samurai at least.
Samurai was actually not back end for mixing, was the back end for Lightning. And so that was Phoenix. So Phoenix was not just a front end, but it was the back end that held the most liquidity, I think, of any node in the world. And so that starts to become the red flag of, are you facilitating the transaction?
Well, let's hit this. Let's show this thing on the screen. I don't know if I showed the whole Seth for privacy thing. He says, we're at war, Anon. In the space of 2 weeks, we've seen Samurai Wallet indicted, arrested, shut down. Wasabi Wallet pulled from the U.S., then shut down. Phoenix Wallet pulled from the U.S., Tornado Cash case escalated by DOJ. FBI warning against no KYC tool usage. Elizabeth Warren letter. And now the biggest no KYC Monero on-ramp from Fiat, local Monero, has shut down with no clear reasoning. Easy to speculate. Again, I think I would argue, based on what you said like 5 minutes ago, that there is clear reasoning, but whatever. If you thought we wouldn't face an adversarial environment, you're wrong, blah, blah, blah. So there's an interesting list to go down because we're obviously kind of in the same agreement on principles of all this stuff, that I think that all these things should be allowed to operate with no problems. And I mean, I'm not speaking for you. I guess you can say whatever you disagree with, and that there's nothing wrong with any of these services, what they were doing. The difference is the like how unexpected. It's kind of like when I first heard about the Silk Road in 2013. As soon as I heard about it, I was like, oh yeah, that guy's going to prison. And it's nothing against, I'm the biggest like Russell Briggs supporter in the world, but I just yeah, of course, the government's not going to like that, right? And
Right.
so it's one of these kinds of things. You started talking about the Phoenix stuff, and so there was a few Lightning wallets that ended up pulling out. Obviously, fully custodial ones like Wallet of
Yeah.
Satoshi that then provided Exodus with their Lightning function and something like that. That's obviously just it's like a Revolut or a Cash App or whatever, but they
Yeah.
just didn't KYC. And I guess rather than KYC US users, they're like, nah, we're going to get out.
Yeah.
Then you have
That's
Phoenix,
expected.
which I have to say real quick, I has been kind of showcased as kind of an edge corollary in that like non-custodial crypto wallet, but for Lightning. But in reality, it's basically a centralized, like fully custodial app, except instead of fully custodial, it's like a multi-sig custodial sort of, because you have a Lightning channel open with
Yeah.
their node. But other than that, it's entirely managed by a large company with liquidity and things. So to me, it's not at all like, oh my gosh, they got rid of Phoenix here. But I don't know if you have a different take than that.
I mean, my take is going back to like the 2016, 2017 scaling wars yet again, there were a lot of arguments that Lightning could be deemed a custodial service. And many people argued against it. And I get the argument. It's a nuanced argument, right? It's like, hey,
Very
as a
much
Lightning
so.
node, I cannot take your money. Well, you can't. But if someone's not paying attention to their channel opened with you, you could, right? And if you knew they weren't paying attention as well, many argue that, oh, you are facilitating the transfer of funds. And say, no, I'm not facilitating the transfer of funds because I can't take someone's money. Yes, but you could stop them from transacting, and you're using your own money. Like literally the transfer of value is using your own money to move value between two channels. Yes, nothing like this has existed before in the regular financial world, but that is getting as close to being a facilitator of a transaction as I could imagine without being a facilitator in the TradFi world or in the TradFi rule set. And so if you take that argument and then you expand it to say, here's this actual for-profit company. They build a front end. That front end uniquely connects to their LSP, Lightning Service Provider node, which also happens to have the largest liquidity of the entire Lightning network, which means the vast majority of, not majority, but a good percentage of transactions are going through that node. Are you now facilitating the transactions of those users, but of course not doing the proper KYC? And so one could argue if you at least broke it up, if it was at least broken up, it might not be as big of a red flag. And once again, it's all just gray area, right? Laws are not cut and dry, black and white. It's just gray area. How big of a target are you?
Which is sad.
And so, it's kind of sad, but we're humans, right? Humans and the English language, at least, I'm sure all languages are not perfect. They're all open to interpretation, right? We're not computers, we're not robots, we're not executing code. And so because things are open to interpretation, and laws are too, it's hard to determine where are you on that spectrum. And yeah, with something like a Phoenix and the infrastructure they run and the app that they provided, yeah, they probably deemed before they were going to get shut down, like, hey, we're kind of in major red flag. Let's go and exit this. And so once again, these red flags, running infrastructure that would help people hide funds from a normally transparent transaction. Now, then as well, possibly being deemed as a facilitator of the transaction, either via multi-sig or Lightning or holding a huge amount of liquidity in Lightning is another red flag. And these seem to be the major categories by which all of the shutdowns have really occurred. What I want to eventually get to, because I know this could be a long chat, is that
Yeah.
there is hundreds, if not more, products, companies, and services that fit into what I'd call some of the most difficult to make an argument against. Now they still could. The government government's got a lot of money, right? Because they make the money. They can shut down just about everything if they wanted to, but of course also squeezes it out into other jurisdictions. But at least the US government could try to shut down everything down to a developer writing open source code and submitting it anywhere online. They could go that far. But the swath
that's a problem.
of projects, yeah, that's very dystopian. But the projects and even for-profit companies that exist that build a self-custody app that allows users to hold their keys and send transactions themselves onto a decentralized network, broadcast it themselves onto that network, is the biggest stretch from being able to say that you are facilitating a transaction or doing something contributing to financial terrorism, money laundering, blah, blah, blah. They could still try to make that case. It's just so much harder to do. And you're also now going to infuriate what is potentially hundreds of VC-backed companies. Now, right now, you're making a small number of very well-backed companies like really upset, and therefore, incurring the wrath of their legal team. But we'd be looking at hundreds if they went after that very, very specific type of an application. And that's the piece that I think we are not seeing yet. Right? Hopefully we never see, because we want to keep that open to users, right? Hey, I hold my keys, I transact, I sign my own transactions. No one else is doing that. I'm broadcasting to the network. It's not Lightning. Heck, maybe in some case you could choose my own node, right? I don't have to use the infrastructure of the specific. Yeah, I don't have to choose infrastructure of the company. One of the things that we do at Edge is we try not to run our own infrastructure, and that's a benefit both from cost and as well from the viewpoint of like, we're not the facilitator, right? The infrastructure is the blockchain. The blockchain is the infrastructure, right? We're just talking to the blockchain. And ideally that's kind of how it is. We're just software. And so that's a key piece of what I think is like keeping things as hard to attack as possible, as expensive to attack as possible, and as defensible from attack as possible. So there's gray area even in that. So if they clamp down everything, then the last thing that's left is, okay, open source software in the dark market that you have to download and compile yourself and run some HTML file, and have to run or connect to nodes yourself, then yes, criminals will still use it as much as they have been in the past. And all of the innovators and regular folks, we'd be locked out. So fundamentally, it wouldn't achieve the solution that they're trying to achieve, but
depends on what they're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's actually a good question in of itself. And part of me thinks that, and one of your, I think, tweets you wanted to cover goes into this, but I think it's vastly political.
Yeah.
Right? And there's notably political alignment around the attack on crypto, which saddens me that it's become so political, because especially given the jurisdictions that have been so, I won't call it pro-crypto jurisdictions regulatory-wise, but pro-crypto from the viewpoint of the innovators, the builders, are some of those that are now kind of associated with being very anti-crypto.
Unfortunately.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously Silicon Valley is at the heart of the world in building technology. A lot of the major crypto companies have came out of Silicon Valley, California in general, and yet California is obviously associated with a lot of the left-leaning Democrats who have been the harshest on crypto, which ironically, ironically, right? The freedom, liberal has its roots in liberty and freedom, and that's kind of the opposite of what we're seeing in that party. So without going into politics too much, it does seem to be somewhat political motivated. And when you make a narrative, and I think this is the problem with politics, is once you make this narrative and that is your platform, right? And you make a story around why people should care about that. And you, even if you see the light, go, oh, maybe we were wrong. You've created that platform. You can't go back. And you've now doubled down on it. Obviously, Elizabeth Warren is a classic example of like, that is her platform. She's going full tilt in, and she has a lot of power within that party. I mean, much like I see that even in like some Bitcoin maxis, that inside conversations are like, yeah, I could probably start talking about ETH or some other stuff on my podcast, but they'll never say that in public or on their content, right? Because they've already created a narrative. They've created this narrative. It's like they're a character at this point. And that character you can't break character online.
Yeah,
and so
I would definitely
with
group
parties.
Tone Vase into that kind of a grouping, because I've hung out with him a few times, and don't agree necessarily, but he seemed relatively decent and have some like nuanced opinions and stuff. But then he gets on stage and starts his posturing, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I get you. I get what you're doing.
You got to put on
you're going to
you got to
work.
put on the suit. Yeah, you got to go to work. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah. So to briefly double back on what Rare was talking about in the super chat, he shared the thing about, says like the Liquid network is available for trading on bisc, and then put the basically, because Liquid is here's the thing, I personally refer to Liquid as a custodial network, when there's obviously that loses some nuance because it's not necessarily, but it is, in that you're trusting 11 out of 16 predefined companies to not censor your transaction, and it's like
predefined companies that were decided by a single company to censor your transaction or prove your ability to get into the Liquid network or out of the Liquid network. And so they're kind of falling under that bucket of what do you call it? Like the multi-sig facilitator of transactions.
Yeah.
And so while I think they're stepping on dangerous lines, walking on eggshells. However, I don't want to go into like weird controversy and backdoor dealing. The fact that it's built by Blockstream and a lot of the backers of Blockstream make me think they're in the clear, because they're probably in cahoots with some of the same companies that are trying to shut down a lot of crypto.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of projects getting shut down, explicitly shut down, that were 100% aligned with a lot of the mission of the folks that built Liquid.
Yeah,
And
that's the ultimate tinfoil hat thing there. I know Rare's gonna have a field day with that one, but it's probably true. It's kind of like, why is Tether still around when it's a little weird, but that could be like an hour-long discussion.
Yeah.
Let's start speed running these tweets because we already sort of talked about a lot of what the contents of them. But just
they all intertwine is the thing. So it's almost like all of the stuff you wanted to cover, while you can go one by one, they all intertwine together. Like, okay, this project, here's some of the red flags similar to this other project.
Well, so the one I posted about the arrest, right? I said another friend of mine, Roger Ver, got arrested joining Samurai Wallet, Risen, Ian Freeman as podcast guests of mine who get locked away for cryptoing too hard. So which is kind of interesting. I mean, pour one out for the homies. Thankfully, of all these, Risen is not. I reached out to him before he went to prison. After he got out is when I talked to him. So hopefully hopefully the podcast curse doesn't get him back in, or get watch your back. Yeah. Just say it, the curse. But the Roger thing's interesting because I don't know if it's tons of speculation. I don't think Roger would knowingly make a mistake like that on his way out, to where if he actually had a bunch of money that was directly claimed to him that he owed, to the extorters, that he wouldn't tie that loose end before taking off from the U.S. But I don't know. Do you have any opinion on the Roger case, real quick?
I won't call it an opinion, but like a prediction. I think he's gonna get let off, no problem. And this case against him, I mean, sure, even if they claim that he owes some amount of money, it's like, all right, well, people make mistakes in the calculation of their own taxes. The tax system is like horrendously complicated. If anything, he even has a statute of limitations clause that his legal team could claim. It's like, hey, we made the calculations over 10 years ago, or about 10 years ago. And I think statute of limitations is 6-7 years. And if he can claim that he even used, and I believe this was the understanding, this is all hearsay though, from what I hear online from people that know him, is that he had used an actual accounting firm to say, how much do I owe? Because obviously no one individual knows what all those calculations should be. You got to go to some professionals. And for one to say, I used an actual accounting firm, this is the number that they said I should pay, that is what I paid. All right. Okay, mistakes are made. Let me pay the fine. Let me pay whatever the difference is if I truly made a mistake. And then, I think he's got the money to pay. The difference was relatively small from what I recall, a few $100,000 in the grand scheme of Roger Ver seems like not a huge amount, maybe huge for many of us. but not likely for him. Now that
Yeah.
the onus now is on the IRS to deem that he actually underpaid.
They
So,
said by like 48 million or something, which is
oh, I
crazy.
saw something in the 148 million, I think, in declared income as opposed to what you owe.
Yeah. I didn't
I don't think he
go
owed
too
48
deeply into that.
million. Yeah, I
Well,
don't think. But although if you declare income of 48 million, that definitely could become, a very large amount of taxes. And so,
what it could have been, and I saw this being referenced, which doesn't mean I think that's what happened, but is that it could have been is the present valuation of what he owed is 48 million. So like maybe he owed like 100 grand extra, and then because
the
Bitcoin went up,
interest rate and
now they're trying to
well,
get him
if you
for
owe
the
a
whole
dollar,
thing.
if you owe a dollar amount, right, then that dollar amount doesn't suddenly become worth more because Bitcoin went up, right? So the fact that Bitcoin went up, well, all right, like when I left the country at 2014, it's the value of my assets at the time I left the country is what I should be owing, right? And so, and that's a problem. Like 48 million, I think that's someone trying to craft the numbers in a way that showed the largest difference as possible. Like, oh, the amount he owed, if he had bought Bitcoin with that amount he had owed till and held it until now, it would be worth this much. You're, okay, but not necessarily the number at play.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah, my understanding is
Rare just
it's in the
chimed
hundred.
in. Exit tax equals ransomware.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah,
It's handcuffs. Like you can't leave without paying us, which is a little bit
Canada's
odd.
talking
This
about
is
doing too now. By the way,
Yeah, so people are leaving Canada before that happens, is what I've heard. Like looking at getting their way out before they get shackled. So yeah, I think it's probably one of the more frivolous suits that I've seen across all of the board of doom. Of all these tweets and news articles that you've mentioned. It's just a super inconvenience. It makes for really bad news to the general public when it's like, oh, this major Bitcoin influencer and advocator, is caught with tax evasion. When you can, like they say, you can sue anyone for anything. Doesn't mean they're guilty. Doesn't mean you're going to win in court, but it makes the headlines and it gets put onto their reputation. It gets put onto the reputation of crypto and Bitcoin. And this one will last forever. Even if gets let out, I'll probably hear people saying this, much like up to this day, I hear people saying like, oh, isn't like ivermectin a horse dewormer and blah, blah, blah. Like that stuff just doesn't go away. And
yeah,
that is the technique
and you have like a
of
lot
like
of
the people in power.
maxis who've been saying that like Roger is a criminal for years because of the
Yeah.
fireworks thing, which is just
Yeah,
like insane.
exactly. And so that's like that is the technique. And even if he goes free, it can still be it still can have its long term effect. And so that's my predict. It'll have that long term effect. I will talk to people that are no coiners, and they'll hear of didn't some Bitcoiner go to jail for tax evasion? Some big guy like, well,
Yeah, only the cool
yeah.
ones did. But yeah,
Ironically, it's somewhat true. But yeah,
it
going
is
to jail
kind of
doesn't mean you're guilty. That's
it
one thing you
is.
have to remember. Going to jail does not mean you're guilty. People
Yeah.
have to remember that. Going to jail does not
Yes.
mean you're guilty. It means that it sucks to go to jail. Don't get me wrong. Many get. I definitely don't want to be going to jail. It's not a good life, but it does not mean you're guilty.
Yes, and at some point, maybe you talk about the social stigma. Maybe it's gonna flip, where now it's just like street cred. It's just like 50 Cent or whatever getting shot a bunch of times. It's just like, oh, it makes it cooler if you're one of them Bitcoiners or crypto people who are in during the days when you actually got arrested
Yeah,
for
but
it. Like,
talk to any of them, they're going to say like that was the worst era, and they wish that it never happened, and it sucks. And
yeah,
they come out of it usually hating the system, as well as okay, I'll avoid doing that. Yes, I will avoid doing whatever I did that they said is bad and that I went to jail for. But they definitely do come out hating the system quite a bit. Um, but and they just like I don't wish that upon anyone. Is at least the people I know that went to jail.
yeah, of course,
Maybe it gives them street cred, but
it's not
it
worth
wasn't
it.
something that they felt was worth it. In their honest opinion, at least for the ones that I know, right?
Yeah,
So
of course. Now, as far as this other lightning thing that we're talking about, the Mash, which I never heard about Mash before, but Mash is like we're shutting down current version of Mash. It's some Lightning wallet plus other things. It
right,
says you can send your funds to Lightning enabled wallets like Cash App, Mutiny, Kraken, Zeus, Breeze, etc. So they
right.
took off,
Yep.
and yes, I mean we kind of covered the Lightning, the managed Lightning thing. Now, Nikita Zhavoronkov, of Blockchair, good dude, spicy takes. He shared this thing about the Blockchain Integrity Act, which is being introduced by a few awful human beings, right? Which would ban mixers, defined as service designed to conceal counterparties or digital asset transactions. The fine for interacting with mixed coins is 100K, and privacy coins, which are lumped with mixers, will be examined separately. But basically, putting a moratorium on, like, preemptively banning privacy in crypto until they can figure out how to deal with it, and then just like find what they're going to relicense or whatever.
Yes, they meant mixers specifically. They did say that they would study privacy coins separately. And so that moratorium did not specifically apply to privacy coins. It was more like, okay, we'll look at that separately. And that is actually a very difficult thing to just kind of look at independently.
Yeah, I mean,
because by something that, what's that?
Are they going to look at Verge and like Dogecoin Dark
Possibly.
and just be like, oh, they had the Dandelion plus plus or whatever?
Yeah, and this is where, like, heck, we were both at ETHDAM. You've heard kind of my take on the importance of privacy by default. And once privacy is by default, it's like, well, what exactly is the illicit act being done by using a privacy coin at that point, right? Having a mixer, even the word mixer, right? Mixer, money laundering, things tumble, mixer, a tumbler. Just by the emotional word salad association between the two solicits, once again, that gray area, red flag, able to target that type of service or act. When you have something like Zcash, where it's cryptographically mixing, but because it's purely cryptographic, there's no actual missing. It's like I'm just providing a proof that the funds I send, are not more than I have, and it just happens to be you cannot see it. It's encrypted, right? In a way, you could look at Zcash like, oh, it's encrypted. It's not by default, though, is the kind of the challenge, because Zcash is not by default. But when it's just all the transactions, like, what is the illicit activity? Heck, I want some privacy to be able to send some funds. So the service itself isn't specifically targeting adding privacy to a transaction that wouldn't have had it. And therefore, a small group of possibly illicit actors or likely illicit actors using it. It's a tough target. And that's another thing too, because it's the entire network. Like with Monero, it's the entire network. You don't have a subset of small contributors that are adding that privacy, such as a tumbler, right? Such as a mixer. It's the entire network. It's every node. Like, you can't not contribute to the privacy by just simply being a node or being a miner, and that just lends itself to being a much harder target than explicit mixers. And I've never been a fan of the architecture of mixers. I'm like, it's both a bad UX, it both doesn't get used much, and then it also becomes a much bigger target. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as Nikita chimed in on that, he says, this is the point where transparent and privacy coins officially split into two different asset classes. Transparent, fully KYC, controlled, traded on centralized exchanges, have ETFs, etc. Private, underground money, no KYC, no centralized exchanges, no easily achievable NGU, number go up, permissionless. So that's one take. Is that a take you agree with or not?
I don't know if they split into two different asset classes, because I think there's still going to be a whole lot of transparent coins that you will still be able to hold, send, receive without KYC. Right. Yeah. So that's the self-custody side of transparent coins. Now, given that, the ability to what I call kind of like hidden KYC those coins, but meaning you don't explicitly KYC, you implicitly KYC them through IP address tracking, through blockchain analytics. The ability to implicitly KYC those coins does improve if you call it improve. It's obviously kind of a thing that we don't want to see happen, but it is going to happen. The trackability starts to grow and grow and grow over time, where heck, do you even need to KYC these coins when the powers that be can kind of KYC them, at the click of a button with AI tools and blockchain analytics and subpoenaing ISP records and whatnot. And so I never assume that any of those coins are private, or that me not KYCing to use those coins means that my name isn't attached to them. in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's a safe bet that people should assume their Ethereum is not private, and that your name, your entity, your identity is attached to those transactions. People should assume that, and same thing with Bitcoin.
You
No,
mean
no,
desertlinux.eth? No one's gonna. You mean people know that that's me? How could I know that?
yeah. And the key thing though is why I still am against KYC is, even if the government can discover that, why should I be providing that to a third party company who could compromise it? Not even intentionally. Like, why should I provide that to Kraken? Why should I provide that to Coinbase? Why should I provide that to a self-custody wallet provider, where if their infrastructure is compromised, suddenly my personal information is compromised? The government has my personal, they know everything about me. And so therefore that's like, I'm already doxed to the government. Why should I dox myself to some random private company as well? And so
they're hilariously incompetent. It's just like giving your passport to some kid on the street, be like, hey, run that down to the post office for me. It's just like, okay, he falls in the river. Whoops, there he
there's passport. So
it's gone.
You might the whole point is give the sensitive info to who absolutely needs it. And while I don't think the government absolutely needs it, they think they do. All right. So okay, and they already have it.
You disagree.
And yeah, they'll put me in jail. They'll put a gun to my head if I disagree. So therefore, they already have that info, right? It's all of the other smaller, although still behemoth private companies, right? Like I said, the Coinbase, the Krakens, and whatnot. The banks, they don't technically need my info in order to facilitate whatever transaction I want. And so the fact that these chains are relatively public means that they could really figure out who I am at the end of the day. Now, granted, actual privacy coins, they are much, much, much harder. No question about it. Much, much, much harder. And so will we diverge into two where one's KYC to one's not? No, I think it will also not KYC transparent coins. They'll just happen to implicitly be KYC'd.
Yeah, my feeling is sort of a bit between those two scenarios, where there will be a lot of the more institutional kind of exchanges and things like that won't have a lot of the spicier coins anyway. And it might not be because of like, oh, they can't. It might be because like the VC money or whatever. It's just not like Shiba Inu that like, oh, that's a great one to list because it makes a lot of money. And then you're going to have the DEX world, which will have all the big players of the transparent world, but then all the privacy ones too. And then there will be some businesses that support like, oh, let's pay for Proton VPN or some random VPN with Monero, Zcash, also Bitcoin and Litecoin and things like that. And then some places won't. So it'll be like, there will be two separate worlds, but I don't think it's going to be a clear line between those worlds across the board. And I don't think it's going to be a clear line between the assets used in those worlds either. It's just, there's going to be some overlap.
There will be, yeah. And it's impressive that we still see a lot of US based exchanges that are supporting privacy coins, and not just privacy coins, but privacy coins in privacy mode. With Gemini supporting Zcash and Kraken. Full Z addresses, and Kraken with Monero. And so we've somehow been able to make their case. And admittedly, for smaller companies like us, we can lean on that as a precedent to say, right, those coins are not illegal. It is not illegal to own. It is not illegal to buy. It's not illegal to trade those coins, and send and receive them. And it's true. It shouldn't be illegal to do that. It should be illegal to do illegal things with them, right? But not to own, send, receive, or trade them.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, there's definitely, there is a war. I don't disagree with Seth on privacy. There is a war, but it's a nuanced war. And it's a
war with constraints.
It's a war that has constraints on the government side. And I'm seeing those constraints. Getting to one thing we didn't talk about, but you posted was like that. I think you talked about the FBI public service announcement. And if you read carefully, I know there's people that came up to me as soon as that public service announcement came out. I'm like, oh, Paul, they're going after like self-custody walls, blah, blah, blah. But if you read it really carefully, and I have it on one of my screens here, you read it really carefully, it specifically it tries to avoid using the word like software, self-custody. It goes out, it says things, it says the term financial service a lot. And that's a term that can, to the normie, can be conflated when they're using a self-custody wallet, right? Because financial service, like, okay, I'm offering you a piece of software. Is that a service? Is it not? And so to the people in the legal realm, you know what a financial service actually is. To the non-legal normie, they don't. So this letter was meant to scare people away from everything cryptocurrency,
Yes.
but it was
The
crafted very
textbook definition
clearly.
of FUD:
It
fear,
told, yeah.
uncertainty, and
Well,
doubt.
yeah, create the FUD, but based on some like actual legitimate statements that if you are actually operating a financial service and you are not doing KYC, then yeah, you should be concerned, right? You legitimately should be concerned, but making it where they're not trying to differentiate between the two, blanket term, something that's ambiguous to the average normie, and get them to be scared enough to use any service in the cryptocurrency world. And so that's my
It's
take on
dirty.
this announcement. It is a little bit dirty. Like it uses ambiguity. Once again, the English language is not precise. Humans are not precise. We're not robots. There's room for interpretation, and you can craft things like this. This was, I admit, if I was in the government and I was trying to scare people, this was very well worded. This is exactly how I would word it. All right, scare
Yeah.
people, but I knew my limitations. I knew what's not illegal. It's not illegal to currently. It's not illegal to use software where I hold my own keys and to transact with that. Even if I don't build it, some company can build it. That's not illegal. So they really steered clear of that. And so that's why I'm like, okay, I see what they're doing here. They're trying to scare people, but currently we're in the clear as the current laws stand.
Yeah, and I think that's for the most part kind of my take on crypto, because a lot of people are like, "Oh, are you scared you're going to go to jail for using crypto?" And I'm like, no, for these reasons. But anyway, let's hit. So Monero Bull says breaking: Monero will be delisted from Kraken Germany on July 10th. Users will also have to redo KYC and accept new terms of service. Other notable delistings equal Zcash, Secret Network, and NIM, but also non-privacy coins like Nano, ICP, Sui, Aptos, and Mia. To me that particularly sounds like I would kind of say like a non-headline a little bit, because it doesn't seem like,
yeah.
it just seems like Kraken's shaking things up in Germany for whatever reason.
Yeah, Germany's shaking things up in crypto, and when it's like, wow, the U.S. is actually less restrictive than anywhere else. I'm like, whoa, at least for now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
until you get to this SEC thing, which I'm going to put up on the screen now. So, oops, where's this? There we
so
go.
SEC, this is them like wanting,
Yeah, or rather, the Biden administration saying that they will veto this law, this resolution. It says Biden administration says it will veto legislation to allow banks to actually custody. Crypto. It says it would, quote, disrupt the SEC's work to protect their investors.
Yeah,
Says
I'd say
Ryan Adams says this will cost them votes if they're doing this before November. I'm scared of what happens after November. Seems they no longer care.
I
don't know what you
it's
think
kind
about
of it's kind of a nothing burger to me. It's kind of a nothing burger to me. I'm sure Caitlin Long would highly disagree with me.
Yeah.
And okay, it's not a nothing burger. It does have an impact on centralized exchanges, which still exist and are still necessary, from being able to get bank accounts. Because obviously this hinders her ability to launch Custodia, which would be an official bank that would custody crypto on behalf of crypto custodians. However, even if Custodia could not custody crypto, the big value add that Custodia was trying to provide was just simply an actual bank account for crypto companies. And really, that's the value add. If the crypto companies can do their own custody and they don't need to be a licensed bank, who cares? Like, I don't, it's at this point, I don't need the merger of TradFi and crypto to come in the licensure of a bank. Like, the bank to me doesn't need to be custodying crypto, so long as it's still legal for some company to custody crypto so that they can facilitate an exchange. So that to me is the more important thing. The fact that you don't allow old school TradFi banks to custody crypto doesn't feel like it has that big of an impact on the industry. Like, I'm not too concerned about that. I'd love to hear some arguments to the contrary, but we have a simple solution: split the two up. Banks hold the cash, they hold the dollars. They do that however they see deem fit. Much like Caitlin Long might do with Custodia, and then crypto companies end up becoming the custodians. Well, I still don't like custodians. They legally can be. Obviously, the SEC has approved Coinbase to be a custodian. They're a fully public company. SEC approved that. So we can continue on as is. Like, that's not causing any rifts that I'm seeing. Like, what am I losing out on because my bank won't custody crypto? I don't know. I don't see anything that I'm losing out on by doing that.
Yeah.
If anything, that prevents some of the biggest companies in the world from custodying, especially assets where by virtue of them custodying them, they actually control the network, i.e. Ethereum. It's already scary that Coinbase custodies a gigantic amount of Ethereum, and therefore it can stake it and vote on the way the currency actually operates.
Yeah,
Take
let's
that
not
power and
forget
give
when
it
that
to
happened with Binance, with Steam, when Binance
exactly.
helped with the
Now,
takeover.
Binance and Coinbase are big. They're not as big as JP Morgan. So do you really want to allow JP Morgan to custody crypto, especially crypto that can be used to control a network? I'm not a big fan of that. And especially now, and if you think, oh, well, Bitcoin, that's proof of work. It's not proof of stake. Well, have you seen the layer twos that are pretty well funded coming out with a lot of excitement and a lot of TVL getting launched? All right. Bob, build on Bitcoin. That chain launched, I think last week had over hundreds of million of TVL in Bitcoin. And that is, to the best of my recollection, a proof of stake chain, meaning that people stake Bitcoin to validate that chain. So now suddenly, even though you can't control the L1 of Bitcoin, if a lot of transaction value starts to move into DeFi on the layer twos, and Bitcoin is staked in the L2s for yield and for control, and you're allowing the big banks to do that, you're potentially giving up control. Very bad news. So getting back to the point here, this announcement that Biden will veto this might not be so bad, right?
Yeah,
Might not be.
from the 40 chess type move.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think he even realizes it, that it might actually not be so bad.
Speaking of 40 chess, the supposed master of that himself, old Teabag, as I like to call him, the former president said, "I'm good with crypto. If you're for crypto, you better vote for Trump."
Oh man, this is probably one of the more upsetting tweets I've seen. So Trump is good at saying and not doing.
Oh yeah.
Sorry to all the Trump supporters out there. I think he says a lot of the things that like. I've never liked his personality. I think he's a dick. He's an asshole. He says like really racist things. It's just personality. Why I think most Dems are so livid, including my family members, a lot of my friends are so livid by what he says that they're not willing to listen or how he says things. How he says things basically turn people off into the nuance of what he says that are actually important, like economy, building of infrastructure and border control and foreign policy, all the stuff that kind of actually matters get wiped out the door because he just sounds like such a dick. So I try to read into, okay, what do you actually want to do? And based on what he wanted to do, purely that, like put his words on policy into another physical person. And they actually sounded pretty good in his last election cycle. But when he won, he didn't execute on any of those things. So that fundamentally is my concern, is that we're going to get a guy who has repeatedly said for years he doesn't like crypto. He's said that I am all about the US dollar. That is, my currency of choice. It is what I want to make sure it retains its power. He's made those statements to now just kind of waver into, yeah, I'll support crypto and not even know why, not claim why it's important, not claim why it's his why is, there's people that like it. Yeah. And if you like it, you should vote for me. There's people that like it. That's really convincing. You really sound like you care about crypto. You really care about what it has to bring. Like, I cannot fathom him doing anything pro crypto once elected. It's all talk. And as I'd mentioned in a tweet in response to that video of him saying, like, if you like crypto, you vote for Trump, is that he said he would drain the swamp of all the corruption and intertwine between government officials and big tech and big companies. And he hired some of the worst people on the advisory board, right? And so board of people that close ties to big ag, big pharma. He basically deepened the swamp. And so I don't see anyone there isn't any at the presidential level, maybe other than Vivek, who's no longer running, although he's kind of supporting Trump. He's still not Trump, right? Other than him, the only person who actually has made a statement, not that they support crypto, but why they care about crypto, is really RFK, and that's it. Now, I know he's third party, and many people think it's a long shot, but if you're a one issue voter or even a two, I feel like that's the closest we got, and many people, like I think majority of the country now is claimed independent, like over 50%. So if you don't have
Yeah.
any specific close ties to, the left or the right, at this point, you got to consider independent. And if you're crypto, I think that's our best bet at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely. I do remember. I tried to find it before the show and I couldn't. I made some tweet many years ago when Trump officially came out against crypto and Bitcoin and stuff like that, and I kind of like ranted, And now it seems like he's done like a. I don't think he's changed at all. If I were to be honest,
It's not
I
a
think
180. It's like 15 degrees best. And I think it's Vivek whispering in his ear, like,
the kids love this
you got,
stuff.
yes, you got to say something good. But here's what you should say. Like he
Yeah.
probably is putting the words in his mouth on what he should say, and Trump still can't say it. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? He's like, okay, I believe in crypto because it provides economic freedom. You got to like pump that up. And then he goes, he can't get himself to say it because it's not in his heart. He
He probably
honestly
doesn't
hates it.
understand it either. Like
He
he
probably
just.
understands it less than Biden. He's harping on Biden for not understanding. He doesn't understand it any better either. He's just willing to say it. He's just willing to say the word crypto. I think he might have said the word Bitcoin. I can't remember,
Well,
but
isn't
you can
isn't
see
he
it
on
in his
his
voice. He hates it. He
isn't he on his
absolutely
like
hates it.
third or fourth NFT collection by now? That's also
Yeah,
something different.
it's like who in his staff and administration basically said, "Hey, here's a little thing we can do to raise some money," right?
Mm-hmm.
And
And it's
so
worked.
while I will admit he
Mm-hmm.
would be better than Biden, I will not admit that it would be good enough for crypto. Like
Yes.
it's not. I don't think it would be good enough. And we've got to look for an option. And plus, there's many other policies that people should look at. Like crypto is one thing, but really, crypto is born out of an ethos that transcends just you know Bitcoin and crypto. It's born out of an ethos of free market principles,
Freedom.
libertarian principles,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, freedom in other ways. And for Trump to say he's like, yeah, I won't squash crypto, doesn't mean he believes in any of those other values. And fundamentally, I don't
Yeah.
think he does. So realize what was crypto born out of, and are your votes kind of aligned with those principles, not just someone saying, yeah, crypto's okay. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's more of a sign of the times where, first of all, from the practical perspective, it seems like this current U.S. presidential administration has been super hostile to crypto as far as like the SEC and all this other kind of stuff, and so that
Anything is better, right?
yes, that's what I'm saying. That administration leaving is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think
Now,
and Trump's
how?
relying on that. He's like, hey, it's so bad that I don't have to be that. I don't even have to be good.
Yeah,
I could just be less bad. And that's how everyone's voted for the past few decades: is who is worse, right? It's
hmm,
like voting out of fear. I really don't want this guy, so I'll vote for this guy. I really don't want this guy, so I'll vote for this guy. And that I think is what they're relying on. I think that's what the unit party in this country is relying on, is that we vote in fear and we don't actually need to like one or another.
yeah,
And that's the stranglehold I hope to break. And that last happened 200 years ago, but I think it can happen again with an independent.
yeah. So I don't care much for politics these days. These last 10 or so years, That's why I'm in crypto, because I think it's a great way that you can actually like change the world without having to always constantly ask for permission. The politics side of thing, I only really care about letting, or for me personally, so I can use crypto in my own jurisdiction a lot better, but also just to like not squelch the speed of how it goes.
Of adoption,
And
yeah.
yeah,
No,
and
it's
so
huge.
I think that what is huge in this situation is that you have, I guess, so if you counted the support, the popular support for Trump and RFK together, that's most of the country, or that's the majority of the country at least, right? The Venn diagrams of like those two people, and if they're positioning themselves, whether again, no matter how sincere they are, that's a completely different story. But they're positioning themselves to I guess pander to the crypto world, then that's a very good sign at this stage. And we're not even in the 2025 bull market pop era.
Yeah.
So I think that I don't know if we're over the hump, but we're getting close to over the hump of the then they fight you kind of stage in the US. Maybe I'm being super, optimistic and naive here, but that's just my feeling based on seeing this kind of stuff. A few more years of the suck, as it were, and then I think we're going to be kind of in the clear a little bit.
I think you're trying to add up the people that appeal to RFK plus the people that appeal to Trump, and think that, oh, those are like the crypto and that's the majority of the country. I think the challenge with that kind of calculation is that I don't think, actually, I feel confident that Trump's base is like, he's not trying to be pro crypto because that's his base.
He's trying to get
He's
new
trying
people in.
he's trying to be pro crypto because there is a base that is fearful of the Dems being so anti crypto. So he's feeding into the fear narrative, right? Like, hey, there's this fear narrative. Let me try to capture a few of those people, right? Even doesn't have to be the majority of his base, but it's like, oh, there's these people that, like, they're homeless in a way, right? And I think who was it? Like Bruce Fenton said that I'm politically homeless when Vivek dropped out. It was okay. Let me try to appease to those I think relatively few politically homeless. So I don't think we have the majority of the country by any stretch. Just because the majority of running candidates are pro crypto doesn't mean we necessarily have the majority of the country. Many are just probably like neutral about it. Like, oh, crypto is not one of the things that I vote based on. I just don't vote based on that. Right? It's just not one of the things I care about. There's neither here nor there. That's probably a majority of my family. Admittedly, it's like, yeah, it is what it is. You know, but I would like to think that we're over that hump, but I think it's still a whiles away. But I think we absolutely will get over that hump. And the fact that it's such a talking topic is obviously vastly different than 4 years ago, vastly different than 4 years before that, and vastly different from, I think, 4 years before that, where you couldn't even get a politician to say the word Bitcoin. Like, you just couldn't even get them to say it, not even at the low level Senate. Like, what they said Bitcoin on, national news, television, and whatnot. Now it's like at the presidential level, they'll actually say it.
They're talking about it.
They're even talking about it. The fact it's a talking point. And so that's why I feel confident that it absolutely will succeed. But it doesn't just automatically succeed. There's effort involved, effort on the building side, effort on the using side, effort on the evangelizing side, effort on the education side. And I hate to say it because this is the part I've last focused on in my entire crypto tenure, is also effort on the political side.
Yeah.
And people have to come to terms with that, government is just built of people. All right. We think of the government as just like this building with pillars of evil, just evil comes out of it, but it's built with people, right? There's actually people inside of it. Many of them, much
Just
like
Soylent Green, it's people.
It's actually people. Like, if you hear like the story, like the Death Star, right? It was this evil behemoth. There's just innocent contractors that were working on building it when the rebels destroyed it, right? And so
millions, maybe like
millions,
thousands, or I don't remember how many. But again, this is all fiction anyway. But
it's all fiction. Who cares, right?
Yeah,
there's well-meaning people, even in the midst of like large, what we consider to be evil government, and there's opportunity to change and craft out like that structure, through politics, and especially at the smaller level, the small level, like the city level, you have a lot of effect there. Obviously, at the presidential level, it's hard for one person to make any effect. Not one president, but one vote is hard. But
yeah, it's super hard. But as far as another thing that we're talking about here, the generational kind of effect of this. So Sam Lyman said crypto is not a partisan issue, which I disagree, but whatever. I slightly disagree. He says it's a generational one. Case in point, 21 Dems voted yesterday to rein in Gensler's overreach on crypto. The average age of this voting group, 48. Contrast this with the Gen Xers to the Dem party leaders, and they defied. Maxine Waters, 85. Joe Biden's 81. Elizabeth Warren, 74. When it comes to digital assets, where a policymaker's stance is more about age than a political affiliation. We need more innovation-friendly Dems, blah, 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 progressives. So what appears for me is that's a factor. I don't think it's the only factor. So obviously
that's generally true of any disruptive tech, right? Any disruptive tech will, while there's always like statistical outliers, it will, generally speaking, appeal to the younger demographic. And so
in this case, I would say younger Republicans. So older Republicans are more likely to be pro-crypto than older Democrats, probably. But then you got... So I guess my question is, are younger Democrats more likely to be pro crypto than old Republicans? So far, it seems like
That's
50-50 according to this one
yeah.
vote. The single data point. The single data point of this one vote because the entire GOP voted to rein in, as far as I'm aware from this. I didn't look into it too closely.
I mean,
Whereas
that's
21
just looking
Dems
at
broke rank.
yeah. So I don't have too much of an opinion on this because everything I would know with respect to that is anecdotal. And I live in California where most people are Dems, but at the same time, I live in and work in a circle which is very technically focused, like a lot of technology based people. I do events and I go to events that, have a lot of startups, obviously crypto focused. So I'm kind of in a bubble that is not perfectly representative of the rest of the population. And within that bubble, I do counter a lot of people that are very pro crypto that even don't go to events. They're like, oh yeah, Bitcoin, cool, yeah, yeah, And so I don't have a good representation, but being in a very democratic um, state. Although I think where I am in San Diego is the most Republican leaning of all the major cities in California, with
Probably
a
true.
strong presence of like military and whatnot. Um, it's been it doesn't feel like that trend is that necessarily true. But like I said, I'm in a bit of a bubble. So that trend of it's like, okay, younger Democrats versus older Republicans, about 50-50. I don't know. But I would say generally speaking, yeah, the younger, then the more open they are because they don't have a strong ties to the banking system. They don't have a strong ties to the feds. They haven't experienced what the world has been has worked for them for 60, 70 years. Um, they're more open to change. They've seen change. They've seen things that disrupt. They look at their older folks as like, kind of the crusty people etched in their ways. They're much more open to change. That's fair. I know there's some things that have evolved in our world where I've been hesitant for it. Like, man, am I becoming old crusty? I'm not a big fan of like VR, AR. Like I'd rather just use a computer and I want to go to like a real store, and actually see and touch merchandise. And I'll order a bunch of stuff on Amazon for sure and other online goods, but I still see a value in that. That may not be the same as a younger generation, but that's
Absolutely.
a normal trend.
Crypto boomers too. I'm definitely a crypto boomer in that I'm like old school UTXO, no ICO pre-mine type, all that kind of stuff is like near and dear to my
I'm
heart. And
younger
like,
than you then. Like I
yeah,
see the value of projects
yeah,
where you're coming out new and you can't just go fair launch anymore because there's just too many projects. You can't get any notice. It's really, really hard. You don't have the resources to do marketing,
hmm,
but you're trying to do something unique and actually different, and you'll need some funding for
yeah,
that.
of
So
course.
it's just a different world than when Bitcoin launched and when Monero launched. And so, yeah, ICOs and pre-mines are somewhat necessary. And that's how companies launch. Every company that has equity is pre-mining their equity, right?
Hmm.
It's not a fair launch. So let's face it. And the crypto world is trying to make a more globally accessible, more censorship resistant version of, in some ways, companies.
Hmm.
And so you've got to give them the freedom to do some similar things that companies already do. And if you believe in liberty and you believe in freedom, they should be allowed to do that. And if you don't like it, then don't use it. If you think it's detrimental to the project and its success, then don't use it. But if you think they can succeed amidst that, and they have a compelling product, really, is there a compelling product? Then yeah, support it and use it.
Yeah,
I don't take such a hardline stance like, oh, everything has to be like fair launch day one, anonymous, no one,
yeah.
blah blah.
That's just my boomer bias. But of course, there's a lot of like random things coming out that aren't like that.
Yeah,
The cautionary tale behind being too boomer might be Grin, where Grin tried to be too.
I tried. Yeah,
They tried to be too much into something that doesn't work
and
anymore.
they have no resources to develop and market. And yeah, you could do that in
Hmm.
2014, 15, maybe even 16. It's hard now because there's too much noise. You need to be able to rise above the rest. You have to have both good product and good marketing. Just like any industry,
Hmm.
if you're the first to market, you don't need to market it, right? If you're not
Yeah.
first to market and there's a whole lot of competitors, you need to at least be known. And then once you're known, people can evaluate, are you worth supporting? But if you
Hmm.
don't have the resources to be known, then who cares if you have a great product, i.e. like
Of
a
course.
grin. So yeah,
Yeah. If a blockchain fair launches in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it really fair
did it really
launch?
launch?
Well, let's hit on this last unfortunate.
We'll do a 60-second quick lightning round here because I do have to bounce out in a couple minutes.
So it says, Exodus says, today the SEC made a surprise last-minute decision that delays Exodus from listing on the New York Stock Exchange American. We're deeply disappointed, etc. Just another thing with the SEC, right? Or do you have any extra take on
the only extra insight I can say is that Exodus did do effectively they already went public, right? Mm-hmm. They did a Reg A Plus, raised over $50 million. And being a company that's done equity crowdfunding, we did a smaller version of that with the Jobs Act. I know that Reg A Plus, all of the diligence you have to do before you launch the Reg A Plus is fairly heavy, to the point where you're effectively a public company after you do that crowdfunding, which Exodus is. They're a public company. They have to do filings and reports. And so everything that Exodus does as a business, right, their entire business model effectively has been rubber stamped by the SEC as being valid. And that is a mark that the entire industry can use. Like, look, SEC, DOJ, all of you, what is any product or company doing that's similar to Exodus that could possibly be deemed illegal when you've rubber stamped a company to go public, of all things? Now, maybe not in the New York Stock Exchange, but New York Stock Exchange versus regular, there's no difference in legality. There may be a difference as, okay, do you have enough liquidity? Is your stock price too volatile? Are you a penny stock? Like, New York Stock Exchange won't let a company that's a penny stock, get listed on the New York Stock Exchange. But rubber stamping them as a public company requires so much diligence that you can't claim that they're doing anything illegal, right, before you rubber stamp a public company go public. So that, to me, is a huge protection, right? And so while Exodus is a competitor, I look up to them as being kind of the rubber stamp for the rest of the industry. If you follow in the footsteps architecturally and technologically on what they've provided, you have a huge argument to say, okay, we should be in the green. Otherwise, SEC and potentially DOJ made a mistake, and they're going to have to retract on something they approved years ago. That would be much harder for them to do. And this is one of the reasons why I think that all of the FUD that's gone out has been really careful not to stomp on top of the business model and the technology model of all the hundreds of apps that are similar to Edge, Exodus. It's because they know that they've already allowed companies to go public under this business model. And it would be a huge retraction to say they're doing something illegal. How did you let a public company do something illegal?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point, and I hope it does leave there. All right, so I'll leave you guys with a parting thought from Rare Passenger, as he posted in the super chat. The state is the gangster you hire to do the things you won't or can't do.
Actually, the big companies is the gangster the state hires to do the things they can't legally do.
Oh, there's that too.
Yeah.
That's a little chilling. All right. So follow Paul at Pollinator on with 2 L's on X.
Yep.
Edge.app
Twitter
is where you go.
Edge.app, yes.
Use the Edge wallet. It's a good wallet. And taxation is theft. Don't forget that. All right. Bye-bye, guys. Have a good week.
All right. Thanks, everyone.